What if there are entire lost civilizations whose existence has been erased from history? These are stories that can't be found in textbooks, and some are so bizarre they sound like they could be from science fiction. But if these histories are out there somewhere, they could change everything we know about mankind. So here's what would happen if history erased ancient civilizations we've never heard of. Let's start with a bang. That is, a huge, inexplicable bang. There are many different versions of how all of mankind's history could have been erased, but one of the more popular ideas among researchers is that early civilizations did exist, but were wiped out by catastrophes too large for us to imagine. A gigantic flood, an unprecedented volcanic eruption, or even an asteroid impact could have devastated the planet and killed off anybody who was around to write down their history. This doesn't just include written text, by the way. Pottery and artwork can be considered forms of writing, too. Basically, anything created by an ancient culture that gives us insight into how it worked, where it existed, and how its people lived. The problem is that there are very few concrete examples of these massive catastrophes happening in the recent past of our world. We know for a fact that there was a supervolcano eruption in Indonesia about 74,000 years ago. It's known as the Toba catastrophe, and it unleashed thousands of cubic kilometers of ash and rock into the atmosphere. The amount of material ejected was so great that it blocked out the sun and caused an ice age. But evidence of this disaster only seems to show up in places as far away as China, Greece, and Israel. Places closer to the eruption in Southeast Asia don't seem to remember it at all. Sure, there were probably people living in those areas, but maybe they didn't live there long enough to become a civilization. Then again, maybe they had just died in the eruption. There are other options, though, like the Younger Dryas impact theory. This claims that North America was struck by a barrage of comets and asteroids between 13,000 and 11,500 years ago. This aligns with the Younger Dryas, a period when temperatures suddenly spiked after thousands of years of decreasing temperatures following the last ice age. The spike lasted for about 200 years before the Earth cooled down once again. But where are the signs of such a cataclysmic event? Well, according to proponents of the comet theory, the evidence is right under our noses. The Clovis culture, named after the town in New Mexico where their distinctive stone tools were first found, flourished about 13,000 years ago. They spread across most of North America, and their perfectly crafted spear points became iconic symbols of the time. But then they vanished. Some experts say the coma's impact theory helps explain their disappearance. Others say there's no connection. If either of these events happened, it's possible that they could have wiped out any civilizations that were around. But are there any other possibilities? What if history erased ancient civilizations because it forgot about them? When you look at the archaeological record, the timeline of human advancement feels uneven, to say the least. We went from the earliest crude stone tools to cave paintings to the wheel, to the printing press to smartphones in just a couple hundred years. The issue is that we don't have records of life on Earth for most of the time our species has been around. We only have records from the last 6,000 years. But if modern humans have existed for over 150,000 years, why do we only have records from the last 6,000? Some theorists suggest that earlier civilizations may have risen and fallen without leaving behind clear traces of their existence. Maybe the people who crafted those mysterious stone tools were part of a larger culture. Maybe they built cities, developed a form of writing, and made scientific discoveries that we'll never know about because they were completely destroyed. We have no record of them today because they weren't left with any record. It's easy to see why this idea is appealing. If there was a civilization out there that advanced itself to the point of creating a global society, then only to have it get wiped out, that would explain a lot of things. For one, it would explain why we don't find relics of older technologies mixed with newer ones. You don't find iPhones in Iron Age archaeological sites. You also don't find iron tools in Stone Age sites. This suggests that each era was kind of isolated from the ones that came before, which makes sense if there were no records to pass down. And it also explains why so many civilizations throughout history share common characteristics. Take the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Greece, and the mesas of North America. Each of these structures served as burial grounds for important members of society. The commonality could mean that people across the globe were evolving at similar rates, developing the same ideas at the same time, or it could mean that they were descended from the same people who passed down their knowledge until their civilization fell and the whole thing started again. But what if there's nothing nefarious going on at all? What if history simply erased ancient civilizations because it buried them? Researchers think that rising sea levels after the last ice age could have submerged entire coastal cities. During the ice age, much of the world's water was locked away in glaciers. As temperatures rose, these frozen reserves melted and drained into the oceans, raising the sea level by hundreds of feet. Coastal settlements that had once been thriving cultural centers were suddenly underwater. But wait, there are plenty of sites like this that have been explored. So where are the missing civilizations? Perhaps they're hidden beneath dense jungles or vast deserts. Many of the areas where scientists think advanced civilizations may have existed during the Stone Age are now covered in thick vegetation or shifting dunes. Could the lost civilizations of antiquity have flourished in these regions before the climate changed, causing the jungles and deserts to grow and swallow their cities whole? There's actually some evidence to support this. Just take a look at Angkor, the ancient capital of the Khmer Empire in Cambodia. Built in the 9th century AD, the city was abandoned around the 15th century and is now almost entirely reclaimed by the jungle. If sea levels really did rise and swallow entire societies, this could explain why we don't hear about them today. There are other possibilities, though. What if history erased ancient civilizations because we all shared them? We've all heard about the alleged lost civilization of Atlantis. According to Plato, the island nation existed 9,000 years before his time, but then it was struck by an earthquake and sank beneath the waves, taking its advanced culture with it. Most mainstream historians agree that Atlantis never existed at all, but that hasn't stopped people from searching for it. Even if Plato made the whole thing up, he wasn't the only person with access to an advanced ancient civilization. Myths like Atlantis reflect a deeper human need to understand our place in the universe. In cultures all around the world, we find tales of floods, droughts, famines, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and celestial wonders. These myths, regardless of their origin, may hold clues to real historical events. Why do so many myths mention floods, for instance? Was there a great flood in human history that inspired these stories, or did these cultures all independently come up with the same myth at roughly the same time? Is it possible that all humans everywhere once shared a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and the movements of the planets? Why do the Hopi of Arizona and the Dogon of West Africa have almost identical myths about the Sirius star system? How does Egyptian mythology describe the constellation Orion? And why do the Maori of New Zealand and the Bantu of Central Africa have stories about a great flood that killed everyone on Earth except for a few chosen people? These are questions that challenge traditional historical narratives and push us to consider whether we might have inherited fragments of a much larger story, one that encompasses the collective memory of our ancestors, a story that transcends individual civilizations and speaks to a deeper, more universal truth about the human experience. But what if history erased ancient civilizations because the universe doesn't play favorites? Let's wrap this up by exploring the idea that humanity goes through repeated cycles of rise and collapse. Each cycle begins with a small band of survivors eking out an existence in a world still recovering from the last cataclysm. They build small communities and develop basic technologies, slowly rebuilding society. Over several centuries, their numbers grow and they spread out, eventually forming larger settlements and eventually full-fledged cities. As technology advances and the population booms, so does their hubris. People forget about the lessons learned from the previous disasters, and they begin to take their prosperity for granted. Eventually, they anger the gods and bring about another apocalypse. and then the cycle starts over again. In this version of history, the people who survived the last disaster are the ancestors of the first civilization. The people who survived the second disaster are the ancestors of the second civilization, and so on and so forth. If this is true, it means that we are not the first to reach this level of technological advancement. Every previous civilization was just as smart as we are, just as creative, and just as capable. The difference is that we keep forgetting about them because every time we reach this level of prosperity, we end up destroying ourselves. Now watch. History's greatest mysteries that will blow your mind. Or check out, were these ancient ruins really built by aliens,